Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. I've just got back from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium where I've witnessed something I think I've seen before quite a few times this season. Spurs losing at home, going a goal down, a couple of goals down early on, having a fight back but not managing to pull it off, and ultimately losing the game against Nuno Espirito Santo's Nottingham Forest, no less. There were some good things, I suppose, from Spurs in this match, but overall it is a rinse and repeat situation which must frustrate the Spurs fans no end, and Postecoglou and all his players. Just so often throughout his tenure have they conceded at first, giving themselves a mountain to climb, lack of concentration, mistakes, and yeah, they had a fight back, and yeah, they had 22 shots, and they did go close. Matt Sells made some great saves. Richarlison finally scored late on. They've had some good football, but you know, it is on them at that point to try and make things happen. And against a team like Nottingham Forest, that just plays into their hands. They just, you know, that's what they do, is they try and sort of hit you early and then sort of sit back, let you have the ball, and try and hit you on the counter attack. And while Spurs did cause them problems because they've got good players, ultimately they came away with nothing. And I don't think anyone who's watched Spurs as closely as I have, and obviously all you guys have watched during the last couple of years, will be particularly surprised by what happened. Frustrated, yes, but surprised. I mean, this is another of these weird games we're having at the moment in between, you know, the Europa League, which is, everyone knows the season hinges on that, probably Ange's future hinges on that. These league games mean very little now apart from pride, and by pride I mean, you know, how badly hit is that pride going to be? Is it going to be absolutely sort of plummeting depths of finishing 17th, you know, huge embarrassment, or is it going to be, you know, embarrassing but not quite as bad as that sort of 13th? So there's not really a lot to be gained. There's only a bit of face to be saved anyway by these games, and most importantly, you know, putting the team and themselves in a position where they can attack those Bodo Glimt games, hopefully get to the final, and, you know, weirdly end this season in a triumphant way. But in the meantime, whilst we're going through these matches, and I'm not even a Spurs fan, might be invested in the story, it's painful, you know, just watching the team have the same mistakes over and over again and come through the same issues over and over again. We had it here, dreadful start. Yeah, he's made quite a lot of changes. Started with the front three of Wilson Odobert, Richarlison, Matisse Tell. Obviously, Son's still injured, but Solanke was not left on the bench, but he started on the bench, came on later on. Interestingly, I thought came on, and he actually went with effectively 4 forwards, where he had Tell, Richarlison, Son, and Johnson all at the same time. And I wonder if that was, obviously they're chasing the game, but I wonder if we might see that if they're in desperate need in those final, hopefully 3 Europa League games, if they're going to need that. So that was interesting, but you know, obviously he was looking to rotate his team to get those minutes into players. But again, you know, Forest, they had a warning shot early on through Morgan Gibbs-White. Sorry, that cough is still there. Do have a glass of water though this time, as somebody pointed out in the comments last time. I should have put a glass of water ready for trying to avoid the coughing fits. So it is here. So in fact, on that note, cheers. Morgan Gibbs-White has an early shot. Vicario saves it, and then a minute later, Forest are 1-0 up. And it's a goal that there's a bit of bad luck, but most of it is self-inflicted, and I think that was the phrase Ange used after the game. So the corner comes in from Elanga, and Porro's clearance is weak. It's not good enough, you know, and it goes straight to Anderson. Anderson hits it, takes deflection off Bentancur, which is a bit unlucky, I suppose, and it kind of fizzes up, and Vicario can't keep it out. You know, obviously a setback, which Spurs are well used to at this point, and you're thinking, well, they are really used to it, and sometimes they respond really, really well. But they didn't this time. They were fortunate not to go 2-0 down pretty soon after, when a great ball from Anderson, Chris Wood sort of turns it home. Vicario maybe could have done better, but it's still a good finish from a man who hasn't actually scored in the Premier League since mid-February, I think, even as good a season as Chris Wood is having. And that was only ruled out by a very, very close but correct VAR call for offside. But then, 5 minutes later after that, it was 2-0, and this one definitely deserved to be counted. Elanga fires in a good ball. Chris Wood, who's brilliant in the air, everybody knows this, he's an excellent header of the ball, rises to the ball. Vicario, and we've seen this a few times, I mean, Vicario in the air has consistently had issues flare up, I think, by now. I think it's fair to say that this isn't just one-off. It is a problem, I think, his aerial ability. And he goes to try and punch it. It's almost like Superman punch. Doesn't get near it. Wood gets up in front. He doesn't, that kind of player is never going to bottle the header or a goalkeeper bearing down on him. Focuses and heads it home. And it's a mistake, I think, but a good finish. And it's 2-0 at that point. And you're just thinking, as I said, we've just seen this all before with Spurs under Ange. His whole tenure, to be honest, but particularly, barring the first 10 games, particularly this season. Although actually last season they went down early doors quite a lot. From then, Spurs did play well. They did create a lot of chances. There was a moment where Richarlison, towards the end of the first half, rises for a header and he somehow doesn't get it on target. I think Pape Matar, who I think was offside, sort of was in his eye line. That was the problem there. Second half, an amazing goal line clearance from Harry Toffolo to Kulusevski header. A couple of really good Matt Sells saves. Excellent keeping from him, particularly the header from Richarlison. A lot of shots that Spurs had. They were creating chances. And then obviously Richarlison finally sort of plants a header into the corner to sort of add a bit of drama into it at the end. But Forest held on. And yeah, I guess they deserve credit for those chances created and the football they conjured up. But I'm not going to give them much credit because, again, they're 2-0 down. The onus is on them to go and make things happen at that point. And why are they making the same mistakes to fall behind like that again? I mean, Forest are a good team. Okay, Forest are a good team. But that's the thing. The Premier League is full of good teams, barring the ones at the bottom who are getting relegated, who even they, on their day, as Ipswich proved with their win at Tottenham Stadium, even Leicester, albeit that was a disaster. But Ipswich have got the likes of Liam Delap who can cause you problems. But they're all difficult matches, home or away. And just Spurs find a way of making it easier for those teams. I feel like Spurs, when they went away to the City grounds around the Christmas period and they lost 1-0, and at the time it felt like a bad result for Ange, because I don't think people really sort of realised how good Forest would be this season. And it was at the start, near the start of where it all started to go wrong in the league for Spurs. Again, they seem to sort of play into Nuno's hands there and the way he likes to play, and it happened again here. And Forest, I think, were well worthy of the victory. I don't really give, as I said, Spurs too much credit for the sort of fight back they mounted, which ultimately proved unsuccessful anyway. And it's just onto some of Ange's. Actually, before we go on to Ange's comments, I suppose one positive was Richarlison, and I think I've said consistently, I think he's been really good for Ange. He's just not fit anywhere near enough, but the amount of times, maybe this sort of speaks to how sort of far Spurs have fallen to a certain extent. From a team with the greatest striker or one of the greatest strikers in Premier League history in Harry Kane to where they're at now. But I feel like under Ange, as opposed to Conte, to be fair, he's always playing sort of second fiddle to not just Kane but Son and trying to fit in somewhere in that front attack, Richarlison. But when he's been fit for Ange, I think he's been really effective and a nuisance and a problem in most games he's played. And again here, he's a bit more of a... Sometimes he feels like more of a goal threat than Solanke at the moment. Maybe just the way Solanke's playing at the moment. He's such an occupier rather than a sort of creative chances. But Richarlison seems to sniff out chances. Things seem to come to him. I think it's because his aerial ability is so good that the team sort of played to his strengths. It might be because they were chasing the game at that point. It's not like he's a brilliant player, but he causes problems for teams. And you do think what might have been for him at Spurs had he stayed fit. But there you go. But look, good to see him take his goal. And I think, regardless of how badly the Premier League is going, there is obviously a chance of Spurs winning the Europa League. They have a great chance of beating Bodo Glimt, and even if they play Man United in the final, they've got just as good a chance of beating them as United do. If anything, they've beaten them a bunch of times this season. But I think Richarlison, I would not be surprised if he had a big part to play in maybe even Spurs going all the way, because I think he's got that ability, and he seems to sort of make things happen, or things seem to happen when he's on the pitch. So I'd say that was a positive from today. But on to Ange's comments. I mean, they're slightly troubling, some of the things he's saying. I know I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but he was asked basically if motivation a problem. In fact, I think he was asked if, like, because Spurs are on course, it seems to be, for their worst points tally, or one of their worst point tally in the Premier League era, which is really concerning. And I think he was asked whether that was a motivating factor for the team to sort of avoid that. I suppose similar to Southampton, or not similar, but not a million miles away from Southampton being motivated by not being the worst Premier League team ever, points-wise. And this is basically the comment he said, is effectively, I don't think motivation is an issue. It's a lack of focus and concentration, which is effectively a constant with us. I mean, that is worrying that this is still happening. I mean, at least Ange is being honest about it. He's pointing the problem out, but he doesn't seem to be able to solve it consistently, and that is a problem. And it's a weird situation with Postecoglou now, because 18 league defeats is atrocious. He knows it. He doesn't say any different. This is another unacceptable loss. They are 2 defeats away from, I think, their worst ever in the Premier League, and that is very likely that it could happen. They're away at Liverpool next. Presumably they lose there to hand Liverpool the title. And yet they could still win the Europa League and finish in the Champions League. And you can see why, with the way that, if that scenario is to play out, you can see, because of the Premier League performances, why there are still some, and there will be some, there are lots probably, people suggesting that they should still part ways, even if he wins the Europa League. Now, I personally would be really disappointed if that were to happen, given how rare it is that Spurs win silverware, particularly European silverware. Obviously 17 years since their last trophy. I think it's 40 years since, or 41 years since their last European trophy, and it would be back in the Champions League. And it'd almost be like a sort of, right, here's your chance now, you've earned it by doing this. But I can also see, like, people using the Erik ten Hag argument, that if that were to happen, that the warning signs have all been there, and you can be the biggest pro-Ange sort of supporter, and you can't not be concerned by what we're seeing consistently in the league this season. It seems like whenever they come against a good team, and Forest are that, not a great team, but they're a good team, then Spurs come unstuck and have problems. And when that consistently happens over such a long time, you've got to look to the manager, and it's on him, and he knows that. And I agree. I don't think it is a sort of. I don't ever see with Spurs it being a. It's rare that I've watched a game where I've thought, oh, players aren't playing for him, or they're just not trying. There might be some sort of element in some of these league games, because they know there's nothing really riding on it apart from pride, where it's natural instinct, particularly if you've got the European game like the next fixture, to slightly sort of turn your minds towards that. I think that's human nature. But I don't really see people sort of chucking it in. I think that was a phrase that Ange said. It's just that it's not good enough, or it's not playing well enough, or not organised enough, all these things. And that's where you do start looking at the manager on that front. And I think that's only fair. What did he say? I mean, yeah, he was saying they give away poor goals, which is a shame because our football was outstanding. We totally dominated the game. Don't really agree with that. Obviously, they did have a lot of chances. They're unlucky maybe not to take something from it, given the chances they created. But as I said before, they put themselves in their own this position by going a couple of goals down. And you could say, if it had happened only like once or twice or 3 times before, that it would be just bad luck. But when does bad luck turn into a habit? I think we're long past that. That habit has been obvious in this team for a long time now, in the league at least. So I'm not really going down that route. He was asked whether he had sort of message to the fans. He said, I don't need to say anything to the fans. They're disappointed and angry, and we are. There's too many losses, I know that. Be interested to see how people sort of take that comment. I don't need to say anything to the fans. I think that's just Ange being fair. He's always, I think he's been pretty fair with the fans the whole time. And he never tells them what to think. It doesn't really go down. I mean, I think he knows that kind of question is leading him to try and sort of have an apology, and I think he wants to go down that route. given that he'd probably be apologising every week given some of these performances in the league. So I've got no problem with that. I think it's a pretty fair comment from him. He said that Romero and Van de Ven subs at half-time were pre-planned. I think anyone who watches Spurs regularly at the moment would have guessed. I think it would have been a sort of performance-related issue. I think as I was coming back, TalkSport was suggesting that maybe that might have been the case, or wondering if that was the case. But I think most of us realised that he's just trying to get them ready in a good place for the Europa League. And actually said, I think afterwards, that they were both in a really good place physically. So I guess that's one benefit, because to be fair, those two were outstanding against Frankfurt, stopping them from scoring for home for the first time in a year, which is what's so frustrating about this. We've gone from basically Spurs having their best night in absolutely ages, that Frankfurt performance, with such a mature display, such a performance of sort of control and discipline and low risk to Forest tonight. And I do see what he's saying. It wasn't like an atrocious performance at all. There were elements that were similar to the home game against Frankfurt, which obviously didn't lose, but they didn't win, in that maybe they deserved more from the football they created. But I don't know, I just think this is Forest's approach. This is how they play. They try and hit you, and then they sort of try and soak it up afterwards. So I don't know. Anyway, he said that Destiny Udogie was rested. That's why he wasn't on the bench. He's fine though, as is Maddison, who didn't think off the bench. But yeah, just a few stats to sort of finish off with. I mean, it's 8 losses at home now, I think, which is apparently a new club record. Need 8 more points to surpass their worst possible total in the Premier League era, I read. Wow. And a couple more losses will be their most in a single season. Just take them to 20. Just a final point, Scott Munn wrote the story the other day, just been off over Easter, so I never did a video on it, but he is expected, as you've probably seen by now, he's expected to move on from the club in the summer. He was someone who was brought in September 2023 as the Chief Football Officer, a sort of newly created role at the club, having worked for the City Football Group, sort of China arm of the City Football Group, for Australian fellow Aussie to Ange Postecoglou. He's effectively sort of de facto Daniel Levy's number 2, really, sort of responsible for all footballing operations. He's undergone a number of reviews at the club, which has sort of led to quite a few people moving on from their jobs, including in the medical and scouting department. It does seem like, a lot of those that review in the medical department has coincided with not really an upturn in sort of the amount of injuries the club have sustained. If anything, it's been worse than it was before. So there is a suggestion, or has been suggested to me, that's part of the reason why he might be moving on. Obviously, Vinay Venkatesham, the former Arsenal's chief executive, is already in place and has been announced that he'll take over as chief executive in the summer. I'm sure a lot of fans, when they saw that appointment, thought, this role looks very similar to what the responsibilities of Scott Munn, and so it's our understanding that it's very likely that he will be moving on in the summer. So just to finally sort of round it off this video, that is the little bit of news, but like I said, that was a couple of days ago, so if you've heard it already, don't be surprised. Anyway, that wraps it up from another defeat for Spurs, another one that's got fans and myself sort of questioning Ange's approach, whether it really ever will work long term, but then also thinking, well, what does it matter right now? It's all about the Europa League, and that's where things can still turn. But I suppose, as I think I've said many times before, if you're already Ange out, this will have only sort of added fuel to your fire. And if you were sort of in the middle, this won't have helped sort of win you over. Anyway, leave it at that. Cheers, guys.